America. Welcome to This Week Uncensored, the only show on television that will look you dead in the eye and tell you exactly what the news is too polite, too scared, or too corporate sponsored to say. Tonight, we're going to talk about justice. More specifically, we're going to talk about the performance of justice, the elaborate theatrical production that America puts on every few years to convince itself that the scales are balanced, the blindfold is real, and the system works for everyone. Because this week, the jury in Collin County, Texas, sentenced a 19-year-old black man named Karmelo Anthony to 35 years in adult prison. And the way this case was handled, from the moment the gavel fell to the moment it fell for the last time, is one of the most comprehensive demonstrations of how the American justice system can be weaponized against a black defendant that we have seen in years. So tonight, we're going to do something radical. We're going to look at the facts, all of them, the ones the mainstream media glossed over, the ones the prosecution buried, and the ones the defense team, bless their hearts, seemed to forget existed. Who is Karmelo Anthony? Well, let's start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. Karmelo Sincere Anthony was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on May 10, 2007. He was the oldest of 4 children. His family moved to Texas, where he became a student at Centennial High School in Frisco. He was the captain of both the track team and the football team. He carried a 3.7 GPA. He held 2 part-time jobs. He had 0 prior criminal history. He was on track to graduate. That is not the profile of a hardened criminal. That is the profile of a kid who is doing everything right. And on April 2nd, 2025, his entire life was detonated by a rainstorm. So here's what actually happened. It was a high school track meet at David Kuykendall Stadium, Kuykendall, don't know how you say that one, in Frisco, Texas. A rainstorm rolled in and delayed the event. Athletes scattered for cover. And here's the thing. Karmelo's school, Centennial High, did not have a tent that day. Their tent had not arrived on the morning bus. So Karmelo did what any reasonable human being does when it's pouring rain. He found shelter. He walked under the tent belonging to Memorial High School. Now, I want you to hold on to that image. A 17-year-old kid standing in the rain, looking for shelter, and the closest shelter is a tent by a rival school. That is the scene of the incident. That is inciting the incident. That is the thing that set the chain of events in motion that ended with Karmelo Anthony getting 35 years in prison. Austin Metcalf's twin brother, Hunter, told Karmelo to leave. Then Austin Metcalf himself, who was 6'1", 213 pounds, confronted Karmelo, who stood 5'8" and weighed 130 pounds. Let me put that in perspective. The size difference between Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf was roughly equivalent to the size difference between a middleweight boxer and a heavyweight. 83 pounds and 5 inches of height. 83 pounds and 5 inches of height. Now, during the argument, Karmelo allegedly said, "Touch me and see what happens," while reaching into his backpack. Witnesses said Metcalf then physically engaged. Some said he pushed Karmelo. Others said he grabbed him. Karmelo pulled a knife and stabbed Metcalf once in the chest. Metcalf died in the hospital. After his arrest, Karmelo said, "I was protecting myself. He put his hands on me. I told him not to." He asked if Metcalf was going to be okay. He asked the officer if what he did could be considered self-defense. He was only 17 years old, terrified, and crying hysterically. Now, I'm not here to tell you that Karmelo Anthony made the right decision. I'm not here to tell you that Austin Metcalf deserved to die because he did not. This was a tragedy, a genuine heartbreaking tragedy for both families involved. What I am here to tell you is that what happened next in the courtroom, in the media, in the streets outside was a systemic failure of justice so profound that it demands to be named, dissected, and called out for exactly what it was. The defense. The defense, like I said, God bless their hearts. The defense fumbled the bag. Because here's the thing about Karmelo Anthony's trial. Even before we get to the jury, even before we get to the racial dynamics, the defense strategy itself was a masterpiece of legal malpractice. Defense attorney Michael Howard chose to go with a pure self-defense argument. On its face, that may seem logical. Karmelo said he was defending himself. But here's the problem with pure self-defense in this specific case. It requires you to admit to an intentional act that you believe was justified. And the prosecution had already poisoned the well with Karmelo's own words. I'm not alleged. I did it. Said at the scene, on the record. When you combine that admission with a tent full of witnesses who were almost exclusively Metcalf's teammates, friends, and classmates, all of whom testified that Karmelo was the aggressor, you have a self-defense argument that is fighting uphill in a hurricane. Here's what the defense should have done, and I say this not as a lawyer, but as someone who has read enough legal analysis this week to qualify for a paralegal certificate, as well as the founder of Template Vault Legal and ReggaeSense AI, but that's neither here nor there. Number one, they should have pursued a manslaughter charge through plea negotiation. Manslaughter in Texas carries 5 to 15 years. With good behavior, Karmelo could have been out by his late 20s. Instead, they rolled the dice on a first-degree murder trial and lost. Karmelo will not be eligible for parole until he has served 17 and a half years. He will be 36 years old before he even gets a hearing. Legal misstep number two. They did not put Karmelo Anthony on the stand. Now, I understand the Fifth Amendment. I understand the risk of cross-examination, but here's the reality. The prosecution's entire case rested on the narrative that Karmelo was a cold, calculating aggressor who provoked a confrontation and then stabbed an innocent boy. The only person who could humanize Karmelo, who could describe the terror of being a 130-pound kid surrounded by larger, angry athletes in a ring, was Karmelo himself. And his lawyers kept him silent. The jury never heard his voice. They never saw his fear. They only saw what the prosecution wanted them to see. They did not have the opportunity to even attempt to empathize. In contrast, Kyle Rittenhouse took the stand. He cried. He explained his fear, and the jury acquitted him of killing 2 people with an assault rifle. But little Karmelo Anthony, who stabbed 1 person with a pocket knife after being physically touched, was not afforded the same opportunity to humanize himself. Legal misstep number 3. Sudden passion was raised too late. Under Texas law, sudden passion, acting in the heat of the moment under extreme emotional disturbance, can reduce a murder charge to a lesser offense. This should have been the cornerstone of the defense during the guilt phase of the trial. Instead, the defense raised it only during sentencing. The jury had already decided he was a murderer, and by the time the defense said that he was acting on sudden passion, the jury's minds were already made up. They rejected it. It was a post-credits scene in a movie that had already ended badly. Legal misstep number 4. No change of venue was sought in this trial. Collin County, Texas is one of the fastest growing, most politically conservative counties in the nation. The community had been saturated with media coverage that framed Karmelo as a predator and Austin Metcalf as an innocent victim. His family had been receiving death threats. The judge who lowered his bond was doxxed and driven into hiding. A January 6th insurrectionist was rallying outside the courthouse calling for Karmelo to be lynched. And the defense decided to try this case in that county in front of that same community without seeking a change of venue. That was not a legal strategy. That was a surrender. That was suicide. Legal suicide. Legal misstep number 5. The sentencing phase was criminally underprepared. When the jury convicted Karmelo and moved to sentencing, the defense called exactly one witness, his mother. One. There were no expert witnesses on adolescent brain development, no testimony about the psychological impact of being surrounded, outnumbered, and physically touched, no character witnesses from his coaches, his teachers, employers, no one to speak to the systemic harassment his family had endured, just his mother begging for mercy while the jury had already made up its mind. Legal malfeasance. Now, if all that wasn't enough, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the jury, because this is where things get, and I want to use the precise legal term here, deeply, profoundly, infuriatingly suspicious. Collin County, Texas has a population that is approximately 48% white. 48% white. The jury pool for this trial included nearly 600 people. After jury selection, the final jury had exactly 0 black members. In a county that is 48% white, the final members of the jury did not include one black person. Not one. The defense noticed this travesty, and they raised what is called a Batson challenge, a legal objection based on the 1986 Supreme Court ruling in Batson versus Kentucky, which established that prosecutors cannot use peremptory challenges to strike jurors based solely on their race. The prosecution had struck 3 black female potential jurors. Their reason for that? These women were educators, and since the incident occurred at a school-related event, they might be biased. Now, mind you, let's say we went with that explanation, that reason for striking those 3 black jurors because they were educators. The prosecution kept a white juror who was also an educator. Why was not that juror struck from the jury pool as well? She worked as an esthetician at a trade school, not a traditional K-12 environment, sure, but she was still an educator. The defense pointed this out. They said you struck 3 black women for being educators, but you kept a white woman who is also an educator. These jurors are similarly situated. This is a Batson violation. Unfortunately, Judge John Roach Jr. looked at this argument, considered it carefully, and sided with the prosecution. Anna Offit, a criminal law professor at Southern Methodist University, was blunt about what happened. She said, "It is a choice. It's not inevitable. Having an all-white jury in a racially charged case in a diverse county is not an accident. It is a decision. And that decision was made and upheld, and Karmelo Anthony was judged by a jury that did not include a single person who looked like him." The NAACP Collin County chapter said they were enraged by the verdict and that it raised serious questions about fairness, representation, and confidence in our justice system. The Next Generation Action Network pledged $10,000 toward an appeal and specifically cited the absence of black jurors as the central injustice. And Karmelo's father, Andrew Anthony, said it plainly. What struck out to me, number one, was the all-white jury in a 48% white populated county. His father also said something that should haunt every American who believes in the presumption of innocence. He said he was convicted when he walked out of the jail. If you look at the news, he was already convicted. It was already done. There was no innocent until proven guilty. He was already guilty. Now, I know some of you are sitting at home saying, he stabbed someone. He should go to jail. And I hear you. I genuinely do. I genuinely do. But I need you to sit with me for a moment and look at some other people who also use lethal force and claim self-defense. Because the contrast is not subtle. The contrast is a flashing neon sign the size of the Statue of Liberty. In August 2020, 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse drove from his home in Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin, carrying an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle. He inserted himself into a Black Lives Matter protest that had turned chaotic following the police shooting of Jacob Blake. During the night, he shot 3 people, killing 2 of them. He then walked past police with his hands up and his rifle slung over his shoulder, and they let him go home. He was eventually charged and tried. His defense, he was scared. He felt threatened. He was acting in self-defense. Acting in self-defense. You drove from Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin with an AR-15 and you were acting in self-defense. They let him go home. The jury deliberated and acquitted him on all charges. Kyle Rittenhouse is now a conservative media celebrity. He has appeared at political rallies. He has a foundation. He has a podcast. He is, in certain circles, a hero. He has a cult following. Now let's compare the facts. Rittenhouse crossed state lines with a weapon. Anthony was at a school event he was already supposed to be at. Rittenhouse killed 2 people. Anthony killed 1. Rittenhouse used a semi-automatic rifle. Anthony used a pocket knife. Rittenhouse was white. Anthony is black. Rittenhouse, acquitted. Anthony, 35 years. But let's not look at just Kyle Rittenhouse. We have another example, Daniel Penny. In May of 2023, 24-year-old Daniel Penny was riding the New York City subway when a homeless black man named Jordan Neely, who was experiencing a mental health crisis, began yelling that he was hungry and didn't care if he went to jail. Neely had not assaulted anyone, but Penny approached Neely from behind, put him in a chokehold, and held it for approximately 6 minutes. Neely went limp. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Penny was charged with manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. His defense? He was scared. He was protecting other passengers. You crept up from behind, but you were scared. The manslaughter charge was dismissed after the jury deadlocked. He was then acquitted of criminally negligent homicide. After his acquittal, Daniel Penny was invited to join Donald Trump and J.D. Vance at the Army-Navy football game as a guest of honor. He was subsequently hired by a Silicon Valley venture capital firm. Jordan Neely, he was a Michael Jackson impersonator. He was a man in crisis. He never touched Daniel Penny. Penny approached him from behind, but Penny was scared. And in America, if you're a white and you are scared, that is all the justification you need. For all that gung-ho bravado, y'all pussy as fuck. In February 2012, George Zimmerman was a neighborhood watch volunteer in Sanford, Florida. He called 911 to report a suspicious person, a 17-year-old black kid named Trayvon Martin, who was walking home from a convenience store carrying a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea. The 911 dispatcher told Zimmerman, "Do not follow him." He followed anyway. A confrontation ensued. Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin. His defense, he was scared. Stand your ground. That's the stupidity of fucking white people. And that's why y'all be dying in these fucking movies. Sit your ass down and duck away from the bullshit. But no, you're going to go follow and go confront and get involved in an altercation, and then you're going to kill the person and claim that you were scared. If you were scared, you would not have initiated the confrontation. The jury acquitted him anyway. Trayvon Martin was unarmed. He was 17. He was walking home. Zimmerman outweighed him, initiated the encounter, ignored police instructions. But Zimmerman was the one that was fucking scared. Zimmerman is the one that was scared. And in America, if you are the right kind of scared, you get to go home. If you're the wrong color scared, you go to the morgue or prison. But it doesn't end there. Here's another example. I mean, I could go on for days of all the different examples. I looked them up. I did the research. There's plenty of them. Now let's look at what happens when the script is flipped. In 2010, Marissa Alexander, a black woman in Jacksonville, Florida, was confronted by her abusive, estranged husband, Rico Gray, who had a documented history of violence against her. She tried to escape through the garage. The door wouldn't open. She retrieved her licensed firearm, returned to the kitchen, and fired a single warning shot into the ceiling. It hit no one. She hurt no one. She was defending herself from a man who has been beating her senseless. She claimed, stand your ground. She was scared. You know what the jury said? Took the jury just 12 minutes. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison under Florida's mandatory minimum laws. So let me say this again for the people in the fucking back. Marissa Alexander fired a warning shot that hurt no one. She got 20 years. Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2 people with a semi-automatic rifle. He got 0 years. And the difference between those 2 outcomes is not the facts of the cases. It is the race of the people involved. You want another one? Here's another one. Because in 2004, 16-year-old Centoya Brown was a victim of child sex trafficking. A 43-year-old man named Johnny Allen paid her pimp for sex. She went to his home. She believed he was reaching for a gun to kill her. She shot him first. She claimed self-defense. She, 16-year-old Centoya Brown, was tried as an adult. She was convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 51 years. It took 15 years, a massive national advocacy campaign, and the intervention of celebrities and politicians before the Tennessee governor granted her clemency in 2019. A 16-year-old trafficking victim, defending herself from a man who had purchased her body, spent 15 years in prison before anyone decided to care. This is not an anecdote. This is not anecdotal. This is a pattern. I want to be very clear about something. I am not presenting these cases as isolated incidents, anecdotes, however you call it. I am presenting them as data points in a documented, researched, statistically verified pattern of racial disparity in the application of self-defense law in America. The Urban Institute studied stand your ground cases and found that when a white shooter kills a black victim and claims self-defense, the homicide is ruled justified in 11.4% of cases. When a black shooter kills a white victim and claims self-defense, the figure drops to just over 1%. Duke University's law school found that in states with stand your ground laws, when a white shooter kills a black victim, the homicide is deemed justifiable 34% of the time. When the races are reversed, that number collapses. Every Town for Gun Safety's 2025 report found that in shoot-first states, homicides where white shooters kill black victims are deemed justifiable 4 times more often than when the situation is reversed. This is not a feeling. This is not a political opinion. This is peer-reviewed, published, federally cited research. The system does not apply self-defense law equally. It never has. And the Karmelo Anthony case is just the latest, most vivid, most publicly documented and polarizing proof of this very fact. But let's not just talk about what happened inside the courtroom, because what happened outside of the courtroom was its own kind of injustice. Before the trial even began, Karmelo Anthony and his family had to relocate to an undisclosed location because of death threats. His father lost his job due to harassment and doxing. The judge who lowered Karmelo's bond, a black Republican woman named Angela Tucker, was doxed, receiving death threats, and was driven into hiding online by a MAGA mob who called her an evil judge for doing her job. Outside the courthouse during the trial, a far-right activist named Jake Lang, who I want to emphasize was a participant in the January 6th insurrection and was subsequently pardoned by your 47, stood with a megaphone outside the courtroom calling for Karmelo Anthony to be lynched. Lynched in 2026 outside of a freaking courthouse, and this motherfucker was not arrested. He was not charged. He just stood there on the public sidewalk calling for a black teenager to be lynched, and the system looked the other way. Meanwhile, Karmelo's family was receiving death threats. His father was getting threatening emails the morning after the verdict. His mother was begging a jury for mercy, and the prosecution's closing argument included the line, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." Mercy to a 19-year-old who was 17 at the time, who had no criminal record, who was a team captain and an honor student. Mercy was framed as a betrayal of justice. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Less than 3 hours to decide the next 35 years of a young man's life. For context, some juries take longer than that to decide what to order for lunch. They convicted Karmelo Anthony of first-degree murder. They rejected the sudden passion defense. They rejected manslaughter. They sentenced him to 35 years in prison. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett said Anthony was among many people who have been over-prosecuted and given crazy sentences. The NAACP said they were enraged. Dominique Alexander of the Next Generation Action Network pledged $10,000 to the appeal. Karmelo's father said something that I think is the most honest, most devastating summary of what happened. And it's very true. We were delusional. We thought we were going to get a fair shake. Stop living in this world, man. Stop living in this bullshit reality. Wake the fuck up. They were delusional because they believed in the promise of American justice. They believed that a clean record, good grades, 2 jobs, credible self-defense claim would be enough, but they didn't have the complexion for the protection. They believed the system would see their son as a human being first. They were dead wrong. So what should have happened? Let me give you the roadmap that the defense should have followed, because this matters not just for Karmelo's appeal, but for every black defendant who sits down in a courtroom and hopes that justice is blind. First, seek a change of venue. Collin County was a hostile environment. The jury pool was poisoned by months of racially charged media coverage. A Dallas County jury or any more diverse jurisdiction would have produced a different result. Second, negotiate a manslaughter plea. Karmelo admitted to the act. He said he did it. The question was intent and justification. A manslaughter plea acknowledges the act without conceding murder. He could have been home by his late 20s. Third, put Karmelo on the stand. Let the jury hear his voice. Let them see his fear. Let them try to empathize with the young man. Let them understand what it feels like to be a 130-pound kid surrounded by large and angry athletes in the rain. Rittenhouse cried on the stand and walked free. Karmelo's silence cost him his freedom. Fourth, build the sudden passion defense early on, from day one, not as a sentencing afterthought, but as the central narrative of the trial. He was a teenager. His brain was not fully developed. He was terrified. He reacted in a split second of chaos. That is not murder. That is the definition of sudden passion. Fifth, call expert witnesses. Bring in a psychologist to explain the adolescent brain development. Bring in a use of force expert to explain why a 130-pound person confronted by a 213-pound person might perceive a physical threat as potentially lethal. Bring in a racial bias expert to contextualize the jury composition. 6, fight the Batson challenge harder. Document every inconsistency. Build a record for appeal, because the appeal is now the last line of defense, and the Batson challenge is the strongest ground you have. Karmelo Anthony has filed a notice of appeal. His family has filed a pauper oath, meaning the give, send, go money, all $515,000 of it is gone. He'll be represented by a court-appointed appellate attorney. Dallas appellate attorney David Cole has said the appeal will focus on whether the trial was handled correctly, including how the jury was selected and whether black jurors were improperly removed. That Batson challenge is the strongest ground for appeal. The prosecution kept a white educator on the jury while striking 3 black educators. That inconsistency is documented. It is on the record. And if the appellate court has any integrity, it will be the basis for a new trial. But here's the thing about appeals. They take forever. They take years. They are expensive. They are uncertain. And while Karmelo Anthony waits in the Wallace Pack unit in Navasota, Texas, the system that put him there will keep running. It will keep producing the same outcomes. It will keep acquitting the Rittenhouses and convicting the Anthonys, and it will keep calling that justice. I want to close tonight with something that I think gets lost in all of the noise and the politics and the social media arguments. 2 teenagers went to a track meet on a rainy morning in April 2025. One of them is dead. One of them is in prison. Both of their families are shattered. Both of their fathers have been harassed, doxxed, and threatened. Both of their mothers have cried in public in ways that no mother should ever have to cry. This was a tragedy, full stop. But a tragedy does not excuse a miscarriage of justice. And what happened to Karmelo Anthony in that Collin County courtroom was a miscarriage of justice. It was a system that loaded the dice before the game even started. It was a jury selected to produce a specific outcome. It was a defense strategy that failed a young man who needed his lawyers to fight for him with everything they had. It was a venue that had already decided the verdict before the first witness took the stand. America has a choice to make. It can continue to pretend that stand your ground means what it says, that every person, regardless of race, has the right to defend themselves from physical attack. or it can admit what the data, the history, and the Karmelo Anthony case make undeniably clear. That self-defense in America is a privilege, not a right. And like so many privileges in this country, if you don't have the protection for the complexion, it is distributed along racial lines. Until we are honest about that, until we fix the Batson loopholes that allow prosecutors to strip black defendants of black jurors, until we stop automatically trying 17-year-olds as adults, until we demand that stand your ground applies to everyone who stands their freaking ground, we are not a nation of laws. We are a nation of stories, and we keep telling the same story over and over and over again, and the ending don't change. That is the definition of insanity. America is fucking insane. Karmelo Anthony is 19 years old. He'll be 36 before he's eligible for parole. And somewhere in Texas tonight, a kid who was a team captain and an honor student and held 2 jobs and had never been arrested and never been in trouble is lying in a prison cell, wondering what happened to the America he was promised. That's our show. I'm your host, Stevie B. See you next time.